What's up everybody, and welcome to a new ShawnSetGO video. First of all, thank you for all the support that everyone's been giving in the channel and for the new stuff that's coming to the channel. We're trying out a few things, but I promise you the content will keep on coming. We're just going to kind of divert to providing new content on top of the content we're already doing. So thank you for bearing with me while we go through those changes. But today, talking about something very fun, which is, I think we talk about this probably once per expansion, to be honest, which is the current loot system. I think that there is always going to be winners and losers of the loot system, but what kind of sparked this conversation was a post I saw talking about, well, you are not entitled to the loot I won in a pug, period. I don't know what's going on, but it feels like there's been a massive uptick in the number of players who believe they are entitled to the loot I won. Getting to 3 to 5 whispers after winning literally anything. Asking need is one thing, but if you say yes, you are keeping it. 50% of the time you get an insult back. The other 50% a whiny response stating why they deserve it more. My DK has a 606 crafted weapon. Last night I got a 2-handed axe from from off court. Silken Gore, which I'll be able to upgrade with crests. I got 3 whispers, and when I said I would be keeping it, the other DK said, but you have crafted. Okay, reporting. I can't recall a time it's been this bad. What happened? Who are these people? I just want to clarify, asking me if I need something is not an issue. It's an angry follow-up if they don't like the answer I give them. Additionally, this is my 4th character. I wanted the axe because I'm not overly invested in the character and goal-wise. So basically, when you go into these groups, I mean, a lot of time, this is of course referencing raiding, but the current system for those of you who aren't familiar, who don't raid, is basically the traditional group loot system. You have a need or greed, with the added change there of having some of those, thankfully, blocked out if it's not something that you can yourself use. Now, how wide that ranges, it does vary. I mean, I don't know how all encompassing it is and like protecting that every single time. But for the most part, I mean, you can see here that, this is having an item level difference isn't necessarily the only metric you can go by. Because clearly you can upgrade items with crests, and so that kind of changes what all you can need for. So it kind of widens that up a bit. So I think the issue where I'm talking about, and why I think this kind of bleeds into the mythic looting system, is because I believe that the personal looting system can also be quite flawed, because when you go into personal loot, the same thing happens. Whether you do need it or not, a lot of people will ask at the end of the dungeon whether you actually need it. Now, the added benefit of or the benefit of mythics is I think people are much more receptive, because often you just get the same piece of gear. I think later on in expansions, the loot system doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter as much, because people are more willing to give up stuff because they're either not as great upgrades, or they're very side upgrades, like they're not really just vertical upgrades. It's not a vertical benefit for them. But I think early on still, I think it's difficult for people to understand how much of a benefit they're getting from it, and a lot of people will take offense to that, even if it is a benefit. But if they get more of a benefit from it, I don't think this is a problem exclusively to this expansion. Back in the day when I was doing AQ, I know specifically, I had literally the BIS classic warrior DPS weapon taken from me by a rogue who did less DPS than me. But through our loot council system, I didn't get the dagger. I never got the dagger. Actually, I got the dagger much later. I got the dagger. So I wouldn't say that the master loot system is necessarily the solution to all of this, that these things need to change. My personal thought on this, like if I were to give my personal perspective on how it should change, is when it comes to guild runs, or people who are doing part guild, maybe filling with pug, etc. I think if you share a guild, you should be able to kind of have your own microcosm of loot. But it gets kind of difficult because say people are just needing so their guild can get it even if they don't, and like how would you break that down exactly? I don't think there's a perfect like size fits all situation in this. I think personally the group loot system works better than the personal loot system in a pug because it gives you more opportunities, but you also see kind of where gear goes more fairly, whereas in a personal loot system, even though you can trade everything except for the warbound items, like as long as like with that system, it creates a lot of duplicates that you just don't need. So I mean, like that to me promotes trading in a way more, but I wouldn't say I want the personal loot system in raiding. I honestly think that the master loot system works the best, for better or for worse. I think there are corrupt loot councils, but oddly enough, I mean, this is years ago, but this kind of argument has come up a few years ago, and I think Asmongold says it best. So let's talk about it.
In this video that's watching has, I was gonna say in this group, in the video, all of you guys have probably had an item drop for you, and you see some fucker message you, and he says, "Can I get that?" His name is probably Asmongold from Kel'Thuzad. But anyway, what I'm saying is like, you see that all the time. Is people begging for gear constantly. It's like, do you really want to have that happen with like your guildies and your friends? It seems like that would be extremely toxic, much more than having a loot council that maybe you don't get the right pieces of gear. Is it really Blizzard's job to police people's behavior to the extent that they're doing now? I think that they're so far over their head at trying to police player behavior that they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because I think that what they're doing is they're looking at negative social interactions, and they're saying if players have a negative social interaction, they're less likely to play the game, and so they do things to remove negative social interactions. And in analogy of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, they remove all social interactions, and that way.
And I think this is like, I mean, it's just the kind of adding to his point. I think this is where the personal loot system as being better sort of originates, is because people don't like these interactions to where whether they're right or wrong in the situation, people will see like, oh, you needed for something that I needed more, and I don't like that. I don't like that you got it. And this happens, I think, in most forms of loot, when if someone gets the loot that you want. But I mean, like, this is kind of like to push further into the group loot system and what Asmongold was saying. I think that the system kind of came from older systems causing negative interactions, but there's still those same negative interactions happening in the facets that they still exist in. So it's not like it resolved it, because what would happen if the personal loot system was a thing? Like if we just stuck with like that across the board. I mean, like, does that fix everything? I don't necessarily think it does. So further into the group list system, this was 7 months ago, but basically the title pretty much says it. This is the worst part of the expansion, and I can't imagine what Blizzard thought implementing that. Before, you were guaranteed to have 1 to 3 items from raid, more if you're extremely lucky, but Blizzard always decided to having fun with the game and actually having something, achieving something is illegal. I thought about it for a while, but today's reached the climax. Imagine not getting a single item from a full heroic clear in 1.5 months. This means 6 raids. Now, this development maybe inspires you to try again, more like it frustrates you to the point of dropping the game. And you know what? This is actually not the worst part of the system. You see, WoW as an MMO means that there is other people, and not all of them are decent human beings. There was an awful lot of times when item finally drops from boss and ends up getting rolled by people who don't need them at all. So this goes back to my point talking about how, even though it does prevent you from like the obvious things, like if it's for a cloth character, not all items are all encompassing and caught in that. So you can still, in some cases, need for items that you truly don't need. Like, it's not going to be able to catch that. But in the point he was making here, and this is and a lot of people really got after this guy, mainly in that post for talking about basically how does that actually happen? Like, how do you actually go through a raid and not get any gear for that long? I've done frankly like 3 three like main like bigger runs of the raid. I mean, I don't raid a whole bunch, just like here and there, to be honest, just to kind of like experience the boss fights, etc., and tank them. But to be honest, I really haven't gotten any gear myself. But I mean, vault always counts in my opinion. So I mean, like vault is always a thing. So that's kind of my catch-all. That's how I consider it. I prefer having a group loot system in a pug system, because you're able to kind of, in a way, like if you're passing, you can make sure that somebody else gets the piece of gear, you know, and it kind of encourages that democratic system, the voting system, in a way, like because you're kind of either greed or passing if you need it less, and if nobody needs it, then at least you're getting something. I think it works in smaller groups better, but when you don't really have like full guild runs to be able to control those things more effectively, then I don't think that I personally still don't like the personal loot system, because even though more people get gear, I think that it has to be a bit of a coming together, and it has to be like, to be putting those in like fairly just works better. I just don't think that Blizzard is the people to be like in charge of it, like controlling that in a sort of way. I think honestly, it's whoever is effectively raid leading should always be in charge of that. But it's like, you can't have necessarily like a ultimate deciding loot council that's like free and fair and neutral. Like, I don't think that's ever going to work exactly that way. So going back a little bit further, I mean, this has kind of been the theme of this week with my content, which is going back to a certain demographic here who was around back then. What was WoW like back in 2004, and have you continued your journey? Main thing this person says is, I think the biggest difference is that it was slow. Leveling was slow. It took me weeks to get my first 60. Moving through the world was slow. You didn't get your first mount until 40, and you didn't get max speed until 60, if you could afford it. And then few classes had any way to go faster, and you walked everywhere. There's no portal room. Doing dungeons were slow. No looking for group LFG tool, and either you formed a group in a guild or tried to use a general chat in capital city. Once the dungeon pulls were often 1-2 groups at a time. Many groups had mandatory CC, so arranging that slowed things too. Folks DPS slower, but like the main feature is that everything is kind of slower paced. Nothing is really happening at this super fast rapid pace. And now we kind of have a system that still tries to reach back to the way things used to be, but at the same way that they're not the way they used to be. And in a sense, they've kind of constantly tinkered with it and changed it bit by bit, but it doesn't really seem to be fixing the issue that they're trying to achieve. So what are my thoughts ultimately on the current looting system, and like, should it change? My ultimate thing is, I don't like currently with the personal loot system how often I get gear I don't need, and often can't trade to anybody else. Like, I mean, if I get it and I can't trade it to anybody else, it's just purposeless for me. I miss where being in dungeons, you get gear. Yeah, sure, you maybe don't need it, but if someone doesn't get it, like there always felt like there was a disenchanter just ready to take it, or it always felt much more worthwhile. Maybe the loot tables just felt incredibly smaller back then. So I mean nowadays the loot you get can be sort of, it feels like sometimes almost anything. I mean, a lot of people complain their vault only has capes, but I think mine was trinkets one week. It was crazy. But often I just feel like there's too many duplicates in the current personal loot system, and that's kind of something that a lot of people don't talk about being an issue with the personal loot system. I often just get too much of the same, and I don't really get a lot of the very unique, or the ones that I'm dreadfully looking for. And the same could be said about raiding. I think that raiding often, like, there'll be like 1 or 2 pieces that are true upgrades and that I could use, and the most part I'm just hitting pass. So I don't really get gear from raiding anymore, and that's kind of a strange experience for me. So I think that while I think the group loot system does work better in pugs overall. I think that the master loot system just works better, but there's not really, maybe there's a way for them to throw it into an AI and just have it distributed on most need, you know, by in some sort of automatic way. But I mean, as you can see, I mean, like all the features that are already automatic in the system clearly don't catch everything. So I doubt there would be a system that would be like effectively a master loot or loot council that's like a third party thing that does it for you. It's sort of like a modified personal loot system to where it's like you get the piece of loot based on need and maybe effort, you know, put out, you know, kind of like a combination of the old system. You get your points based on efforts you put in. It used to be basically how early you went into the raid, or if you buffed and stuff like that, or how much you contributed to the boss fight. And then based on like I guess maybe you can do like a modified GDKP in a sort of way where it's like once you're in that, then you can start bidding in a sort of way. It seems like an algorithm would have to be created to be overly official. I think for the most part, the best that we could hope for or desire for is like an add-on that would do it. But I doubt we could have one that would be so universally used across the board that everyone would feel happy. I'm sure some people would feel it'd be unfair in some sort of way. So with that being said, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope this kind of like gave you a little bit of perspective of what people are currently thinking with the loot system. I know this is kind of an argument that's kind of, it's done every expansion. I know it doesn't seemingly get better. I mean, this was something that was created to, the current system anyways, was created to prevent the way it used to be of ninja looting and preventing those things, but in a way that kind of still happens. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on it? I mean, whether you played this game a while or if you played this game a short time, what are your woes with the current loot systems? And what do you feel like could be a way to fix that? And then additionally, what's your favorite loot system to use in dungeons, raids, etc.? Like what do you feel like would work better? And then the last thing that I always hesitate to say is, do you feel like that these loot systems are created to benefit the top 1% of guilds and raiders that really don't represent the rest of us? Because I feel like a lot of these things have been changed not to reflect the majority of the population who play the game, but the people who are doing split runs, you know, like, which is not a majority of us. So should there be a different system for those people, or should those people just be allowed to do what they please, and then we create a system that's for everybody else, you know, something along those lines? So let me know in the comments. Of course, like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the page for more WoW content. And as per always, all my socials and so like are going to be ShawnSetGO. Hit us up. Join our brand new like exclusive community and get early access to content as well as badges and hopefully more soon. I hope to do more additional content for you guys exclusively. But until next time, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.